Okay, so here's what's happened. I was talking and telling people that my stream health was showing as not good, and then it crashed on us. It looks like we have lost internet in the building. So I will record this and then upload it later. No problem. It'll work just fine, right? Technology, gotta love it. Anyway, I was about to do some housekeeping things. First of all, just let you know that things at the church have kind of kicked off back to normal, quote unquote normal, right? We have 2 services, 9 and 11, children's ministry in both of those hours. Youth group for junior high and senior high are meeting at 9 o'clock. And I'm going to assume that most of the people who watch these live streams are adults. And adult community groups meet in the 10 o'clock hour. There's 2 different options, one on the historicity of Exodus, and the other is on political theology. Both of those are recorded, or one of them is actually live streamed, but you can find both of those on the ACG page of our website, which is eccbloomington.org. Also, if you're a college student, I know there are a couple college students who have checked out the live streams on occasion. Connection starts this Sunday, which will be August 30th at 6 p.m. We'll be meeting in the sanctuary and starting off a new sermon series called Muscle Memory. It's about the practices that become habits and enable us to grow spiritually in our walk with Christ. Okay, so that's the housekeeping kind of stuff. We are starting a new series on the book of Jonah, which is one of my favorite Old Testament books, and Jonah is one of my least favorite characters in all the Bible. I had gone back and forth between a couple different titles for this series. I had thought, Jonah, the no-good son of Amittai, or Jonah, the rebel without a chance. But in the end, I just went with Jonah. That no-good, stubborn, rebellious prophet. Downright mean-spirited in some ways. So stick with me. I don't know that my read on Jonah is the typical read. But let's talk about the book of Jonah here a little bit. I think there's a lot that is applicable to us in our Christian walk. But first of all, just think about some kind of background information. The date, the author, the genre of the book of Jonah. The author of Jonah is, frankly, unknown. It's probably not Jonah because Jonah is referred to in the third person all throughout this. And the date of the composition of Jonah is unknown as well. Probably sometime either during the exile or after the exile of Israel. But the events of Jonah probably happened sometime in the late 8th century as the empire, the nation of Assyria, was on the rise in the ancient Near East. Jonah as a book is part of the Minor Prophets, that collection of 12 different prophets. But he's unlike all of them in that the book of Jonah isn't a record of Jonah's oracles. It's this story, this narrative of the prophet Jonah and his mission to Nineveh. It is historical narrative, and some have argued that it's historical narrative that is supposed to be allegory or a kind of an extended parable. I think there are allegorical or parabolic type elements to the book of Jonah, but I am convinced that it's historical narrative. For one reason, the prophet named here, Jonah, is a historical figure. We read about him not just here in the book of Jonah, but also in 2 Kings chapter 14. This is what 2 Kings 14 says. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, the king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Jehoash, king of Israel, became king in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. He did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. And it goes on and describes he didn't set aside the sins of his father before him, and he continued in those. He was the one who restored the boundaries of Israel from Lebo Hamath to the Dead Sea, in accordance with the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, spoken through his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath Hepher. If you keep reading through this section, 2 Kings 14, one of the things that the author of 2 Kings points out is that in Israel, there was no helper for the people. It's interesting, and I think likely that Jonah is almost being portrayed as a false prophet. Here you have King Jeroboam, who is evil, who does what's wicked in the eyes of the Lord, doesn't turn aside from the sins of his father, and yet Jonah's giving him a good word. Jonah is saying, yeah, your boundaries, go and expand them. If you contrast that with the book of Amos, written at the same time, Amos is nothing positive, at least in the present. Amos points people to the future and, positive things. But he's just calling out the sin of the people and of Israel's leaders. You don't get any of that from Jonah here, at least in what the author of 2 Kings is portraying. There's no helper for the people. Jonah's just kind of a health and wealth prosperity gospel, even though this king is a wicked king. So I don't know if you'd put Jonah entirely in the category of false prophet, but maybe. There's nothing good that's coming out of Jonah here, it doesn't seem like. Okay, so set that aside for a minute. That's kind of the historical background of the book of Jonah, or of the person Jonah, the prophet. And think about the book of Jonah. I would encourage you to kind of transport yourself to high school or college literature classes that you have taken and read Jonah, maybe do that this coming week, as a piece of good literature, a good short story. Jonah is an inspired book of the Bible. I don't want to set that aside. But one of the things I think we fail to do is treat the Bible as good literature. In a good story, you would pay attention to settings, to literary devices, to narrator, to plot, to things like personification. I'd encourage you to do that as you read through the book of Jonah, because there is some incredibly rich irony, personification that the author of Jonah uses to make some profound theological points. And we'll try to pick up on those as we go throughout this. Okay, so background information, how we're going to approach Jonah as literature and inspired literature. I think that's important. But here's how the book of Jonah starts. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. And Jonah rose. Stop there for a moment, okay? That's verse 1 through the first part of verse 3. Notice what direction God is, right? I mean, this is almost a no-brainer. We don't talk like this, but in this story, what direction is God? Where does he live? And the answer is up. The sins of Nineveh came up before me, God. God's concern, though he's in heaven, isn't just with heavenly things, and it's even not just with Israel. Here he sees this pagan nation and the wickedness of this pagan nation, and it concerns God. Their sins have come up before me. And so he sends this command to this prophet Jonah, arise. Keep that in mind. Keep both the fact that God is up and this command to Jonah, arise. Keep both those in mind. He says, go to Nineveh, this great city. We'll read later in the book how big the city of Nineveh is. But Jonah knows of Nineveh. It's an important hub, especially as Assyria is ascending to power. And it's described as a great city. Not great in the fact that it's morally awesome, but great in the sense of size, breadth, population, things like that. So this command comes, arise. And we read, and Jonah rose. I mean, that's what you would expect of a prophet of Israel, right? When God says something, the prophet obeys. If you're reading along in your Bible at home, probably verse 3 doesn't say, and Jonah arose. It likely says, but Jonah arose. The Hebrew conjunction does double duty. It's a simple, actually just a letter. It's a vav. It looks like an upside down L. And it can do duty as and or but, or other, frankly, conjunctions as well. So if you're reading along and you see this vav, you would expect, if you're reading this for the very first time, you would expect it to be and. God commanded, and the prophet obeyed. But we know the whole story. We know the story of Jonah. And the translators are right to translate it but. But Jonah rose, starts off good, but he's fleeing to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. Remember, God is up, right? The sins of Nineveh have gone up to God. In which direction is Jonah going? Down. Not just once, but repeatedly. Jonah is said to be going down. He went down to Joppa, and he goes down into the belly of the ship. And eventually he's going to go down into the depths of the sea while he's in the belly of the great fish. It's explicit. He's trying to flee from the presence of the Lord. If God is up, Jonah's going down. If God said, go to the east, to Nineveh, well, Jonah's going to the west, to Tarshish, probably a region of Spain. He's trying to flee from God, which shows, frankly, Jonah probably has a more pagan understanding of God than a Hebrew or a Christian understanding. In the pagan world, gods were regional gods. You had a god of this thing or of this city. And so you could flee the god of this city by going to a different city. And it seems as though Jonah has a pretty deficient view of God and his presence if he's going to try to flee from God's presence. The story continues, and we know this part of the story, right? But God hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened, or actually literally translated, the ship thought it was going to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. God sends this storm, and the sailors are panicking. What I think is interesting is God commands the storm, sends it, and it goes. God sent Jonah, and Jonah disobeyed. The wind, the weather, nature obeys God, but here his prophet is portrayed as disobeying him. And the sailors are frantic. They're working, they're doing their part, they're trying to lighten the ship, and they're praying to their God. But where's Jonah? Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. Again, I think the author is really intentionally playing on this. God is up, but Jonah keeps descending down, down, down. Now he's down in the inner part of the ship, and he's laid down and he's fast asleep. I don't know if we're supposed to picture Jonah as kind of in this peaceful rest. That seems hard for me to imagine. It's more as if he's just resigned himself to his fate. He's resigned himself maybe even to die and to sink with the ship. He's fast asleep. It's almost as if he's in this stupor, this trance kind of sleep. But the command from God is inescapable. The captain came to him and said, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, that we may not perish." Remember, the first words spoken to Jonah by God were "arise," and he can't escape that word. Here the captain comes to him and says, "Arise and call out to your God." Maybe the God you serve, and everyone in the pagan world had a God, maybe your God will be the one that saves us. Our gods, they ain't working for us right now. Maybe your God will, and we won't perish. I love the fact that Jonah just can't get away from this call that God has placed on his life. Arise. The story continues. And they said to one another, come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots. In essence, they rolled dice. And the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and what people are you? Again, you get this story in which everybody and everything is obeying God except his prophet. The lot falls on Jonah. If you've read Proverbs, you've probably read Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. God is directing even the lot. That indicates Jonah is the problem here. And he gets to all these questions from the sailors. Whose account does this evil come from? What's your occupation? What do you do? Where are you from? What country is your country? And what people are you? Jonah's response is a little bit evasive, honestly. And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, what is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. In essence, Jonah ignores most of their questions. He dodges the question on whose account has this evil come. He ignores the question, what is your occupation? He ignores the question, where are you from and what is your country? He goes right to the question, what people are you? And he says, I am a Hebrew. I think that exposes one of Jonah's significant sinful problems. And that's his ethnocentricity, his ethnic pride. He is proud to be a Hebrew. And so he's going to throw that out there. He's not going to tell them, that I'm a prophet. He's not going to tell them, all the things that it's on my account that this evil has come. But he's going right for the fact that I'm a Hebrew. I'm one of God's chosen people. And I think that ethnic pride, that ethnocentrism, makes him reluctant to want to extend God's grace, God's love to anyone else. Not the Ninevites. He doesn't want to go there. Not even these sailors. He wants to kind of hoard God's grace and God's favor for himself. He says, I fear the Lord. And if you know the story, you're thinking, really? Jonah, really? Do you? Do you fear the Lord? I don't think so, because you're disobeying. You're rebelling against God. So you don't really fear the Lord. And I love how he describes God, the God who is in heaven, who's made sea and dry land. In other words, everything that there is, he is God of it. And if you're the sailors, you're probably thinking, really? Are you stupid? You're running from the God who created the ocean, and you're on the ocean. It doesn't make any sense. And so they're filled with this, the phrase here is exceeding fear, because they knew he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them that. The story goes on, and then they said to him, what shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea had grown more and more tempestuous. He said to them, pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. Nevertheless, the people rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not. And the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. That's a great word, tempestuous. Need to incorporate that more in my daily conversations, I think. So they're asking, okay, now you've told us what's the problem. What do we do about it? And Jonah says, well, pick me up and throw me into the sea. Here's where you might struggle with my interpretation of Jonah. Okay, I'll be honest. Why? Why did Jonah say, pick me up and throw me into the sea? Why didn't he just jump overboard? I really don't think Jonah wants the pagans to be saved. I think he wants to make them guilty of taking his life. He doesn't want these pagan sailors to be saved. He didn't want the pagan Ninevites to be saved because frankly, he hates the Gentiles. He's that kind of ethnocentric. He's that much wrapped up in being a Hebrew, and God is for the Hebrews. The sailors reject this idea. They're not going to throw him overboard. They don't want to be guilty of this man's innocent blood. So they strive all the more to row back to shore. But that rowing is in vain, and the sea grows more and more angry. And so they realize this isn't working. So this is verse 14 now. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Here, the sailors, these pagan sailors who had been praying to their own gods, now they're praying to Yahweh, the God of Israel. They're praying and they're asking for forgiveness. They're asking for salvation, for rescue, and they're acknowledging his sovereignty. Jonah hasn't done any of those things. He hasn't prayed to the Lord. He hasn't asked for forgiveness. He hasn't asked for rescue. And he hasn't acknowledged God's sovereignty. He's still trying to run away from God. The sailors are, in a way, more Christian, more in tune with God than Jonah is. I know that's a weird way to say it, because this is prior to Christ, right? But they're more in tune with who God is and what he's doing. They're praying for forgiveness. They're asking for rescue. So they throw him into the sea, and the sea quits its raging. Here's the penultimate conclusion of Jonah chapter 1. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. These pagan sailors turn into worshipers. You know, Jonah is an unwilling evangelist. He doesn't want to share God's grace. And yet now they're making vows to God. They're offering sacrifices to God. They're praying and they're fearing the Lord. Jonah has turned into an evangelist, not by his good actions, but as God reveals his wrath, his anger towards Jonah, and they realize God is a real God. They'd not seen this kind of power from their pagan deities, but they see it from Yahweh and they fear the Lord. And this is the last verse of Jonah chapter 1. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So the Lord sends a great fish, and the fish obeys, right? Everything is obeying, even stupid, dumb, slimy fish, but not his stupid, dumb, slimy prophet. Jonah's just not portrayed in this good light through Jonah chapter 1. This great fish swallows up Jonah. The fish obeys, but not Jonah. And he's in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. That's how Jonah chapter 1 ends. Next week we'll pick up Jonah chapter 2. But take a couple minutes with me and think about some takeaways from Jonah chapter 1. One of the most important questions I ask about any passage I'm reading is, what does this passage teach me about God? And maybe first and foremost in Jonah chapter 1, we see God's sovereignty. God is not a limited God. He's not limited by geography. He's not limited over one region. He's not just the God of crops or the God of air or the God of, fertility. Not the God of the Israelites only. He's also sovereign over Nineveh and over storms and over pagan sailors. God isn't limited. And I love seeing that in Jonah chapter 1. You also see that when this sovereign God calls the proper response is obedience. You see that from everything in the book of Jonah except Jonah. The wind obeys, the sailors obey, the fish obeys. All these things are obeying God's call. The lot obeys, right? But not Jonah. The proper response when God places a call in our life, it is obedience. Another thing you see is this God, the sovereign God, doesn't give up on disobedient people. And that's really encouraging. And I've seen that in my own life. When I went off to college, I felt subjectively that I had a call to ministry. But because I grew up in a pastor's home, I actually wanted nothing to do with ministry. So I resisted that call for basically 2-3 years in college. And I felt God pursuing me through that. The hound of heaven chasing me down. He gave me no peace in my life. Things in my life were just not lining up. Falling apart is an overstatement, maybe. I was still getting good grades. I was fine. But the rebellion that I was, as I was rebelling against God, that kind of rebellion was spilling over into other areas of my life. And I just had no peace. It was God pursuing me. And God does that to his disobedient children. But the sovereign God, his purposes are going to be fulfilled. You see that? His purposes for these sailors, they turn into worshipers. Jonah doesn't want that. And yet, God accomplishes his purposes even through his people's disobedience. So, again, that's chapter 1 of the book of Jonah. Chapter 2 is a little bit less narrative. It's more Jonah's prayer while he's in the belly of the fish. I encourage you to read that. And maybe read that with an eye to how Jonah is incorporating other scriptures into this prayer. And ask yourself, is that a good thing? What does that mean? So I know that none of you were able to watch this live because my internet crashed. It is back up. I've recorded this and I will upload it as soon as possible so that if you have questions, please don't hesitate to leave those in the comments or email me directly. Look forward to that. Hopefully, we'll get to see you on Sunday if you're around. And if not, thanks for checking out this live stream. The 11 o'clock service at ECC is also live streamed, and we'd invite you to that as well. Have a great day, and God bless.